Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to BriefingsDirect. Our next Business Trends panel discussion explores how the role of the data scientist in the enterprise is expanding in both importance and influence. Data scientists are now among the most highly sought-after professionals, and they're being called on to work more closely than ever with enterprise strategists to predict emerging trends, optimize outcomes, and create entirely new kinds of business value. To learn more about the modern data scientists and how they operate and why a new level of business analysis professional certification has been created by the Open Group, we're now joined by our panel. We're here with Martin Fleming, Vice President, Chief Analytics Officer, and Chief Economist at IBM. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Dana.
We're also here with Maureen Norton, Global Data Strategist, Professional Lead, Distinguished Market Intelligence Professional, and author of Analytics Across the Enterprise. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
And we're also here with George Stark, Distinguished Engineer for IT Operations Analytics at IBM. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Dana.
You know, data scientists we're now sort of characterizing as a profession. This seems to be something new to me, the context of a professional in business around data science. Why have we elevated it to this level, Martin?
Well, the benefits that we have from the technology that's now available, it wasn't useful even 18 months ago, has really allowed us to bring together the more traditional skills and space of mathematics and statistics with computer science and data engineering. And it's really all about the very rapid pace of the change in technology that we've seen.
Maureen, it seems that the data scientists were sort of behind the scenes people, sneakers, beards, white lab coats, if you will, maybe. What's changed? What's changed from behind the scenes to now more prominent?
Well, the data scientists are really consulting with the major leaders in each corporation and enterprise, and they're really a consultant to them. So they're really not so much in the back room just mulling around in data anymore. They're really taking those insights that they're able to glean and support with facts and using them to provide recommendations and provide insights to the business.
And of course, most companies now recognize that being data-driven is imperative, that you can't really succeed in today's world without being data-driven. But many of them have a hard time getting there, so it's easier said than done. George, why and how would the data scientist as a professional perhaps close that gap or help?
Well, Dana, the biggest drawback in integration of data sources is having disparate data systems. The financial system is always separate from the operational system, which is always separate from the HR system. And you need to combine those things, and you need to make sure that they're all in the same units, they're all in the same time frame, and they're all combined in a way that can answer two questions. You have to answer so what, and you have to answer what if. And that's really the challenge of data science.
Mm-hmm. So there's an awful lot that has to go on still behind the scenes before you can get to that point where the aha moments and the strategic inputs can take place. Martin, tell us a little bit more about how the nature of work might be changing in such a way that the entry point for this data scientist professional is probably just at the right time.
The kind of insights that data scientists are providing are allowing organizations to understand where there are opportunities to improve productivity, how they can help to make their workers more effective, more productive, create more value, and enhance the role of individual employees. And it's that value creation, that the integration of the data that George talks about and the use of the analytic tools, that's really driving the fundamental changes that we're seeing across many organizations.
Is there any sort of standardization as to how the data scientist is being organized within companies that report to a certain C-suite executive or another, or one office or another, or multiple? Has that settled out yet, or is there still perhaps a period of churn as to where the data scientist as a professional fits in, Maureen?
I think that we're still seeing a fair amount of churn. There's been different approaches being tried. Certainly the centralized center of excellence, that can support other business units in a company, has a lot of believers and followers in that approach. And the economies of scale that helps you with is it's hard to find one person with all of the skills you might need. You described the person in the back, with their sneakers and everything else, and I'm describing the consultant with the president of companies. And you can imagine that sometimes you can't find all of that in one individual, but you can build teams that have those complementary skills. And we always like to say that data science is a team sport, and that's part of why.
So, George, are we at the point where we're sort of putting some structure around this, even the whole concept of an office of the data scientists? Or are we focusing more at this point on certification on the individual, the skill sets, what the right background is, and how to make sure that the right people get into the right slots? Have we progressed from the individual to the group yet?
I don't believe we're there yet. We're still certifying at the individual level. But as Maureen said, and as Martin alluded to, the group that you're in has a large effect on how you get certified and what kinds of solutions you come up with.
Mm-hmm. And does the certification start to lead to the managerial side of this? Would the data scientist, as a certified data scientist, be someone to start organizing in a methodological, proven way that group or that office?
Yeah, so the certification that we are beginning to work through and announcing really focuses on not only the skills, the technical skills of a data science, but project management and project leadership. So as data scientists progress through their careers, the more senior folks are certainly in a position to take on very significant leadership and management roles. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing over time, as George was referencing, the beginnings of a structure beginning to appear, first in the technology industry, and over time we'll see it in other industries. But the technology firms whose names we're all familiar with are the ones who've really taken the lead in putting the structure together.
How has the day in the life of the typical data scientist changed? If we're now at this point where they're higher in importance, more visible, taking on a different managerial type of responsibility. Maureen, what's changed in 10 years since the day of the life then and the day of life now?
Well, I think a lot has changed, and I'm going to actually send this one over to George, who has 30 years experience doing this, and he'll have an interesting perspective. So,
George, same question.
So, yeah, it's scary to say, but I've actually been a data scientist for 30 years, and I started out writing my own Fortran 77 code to integrate data sets, to do eigenvalues and eigenvectors, and build models that would discriminate among key objects and allow us to predict what something was. The difference today is I can do that in an afternoon. We have the tools, we have the data sets, we have all the capabilities with visualization tools and SPSS and Watson and Tableau and many faces. Things that used to take me months now take me a day and a half. I mean, it's incredible, the change.
And so do you find yourself as a modern data scientist being an interpreter? Are you interpreting what the data science can do to the business people, or are you interpreting what the business people need and bringing that back to the data scientists, or perhaps both?
It's absolutely both. You go talk to the business folks. I was with a client this afternoon and I told them, here's some things we can do today. And they said, well, what I really need is something that does this. And I said, oh, well, we can do that. And here's how we would do it, and show them what the roadmap is. And, so it's both. I'll take it back to my team and say, hey, we need to build this.
So is there a language, culture, organizational divide type of a skill set that we're looking at? Or we not quite gotten there yet? It seems to me that you're talking apples and oranges when it comes to a business requirements need and what the data and the technology can then produce. Maureen, how do we create a Rosetta Stone effect here?
Well, what we are really focused on in the certification is supporting this is the data scientists really have to understand the business problem, right? That's where everything starts from. And knowing how to ask the right questions and scope the problem and be able to then translate that and look at the data available and even some that you infer to be able to come up with insights and a solution along those lines. Mm. I think that it's just increasingly important that you start with the problem, right? You don't start with your solution and say, I've got this many things I can work with. Right. It's like, how are we going to solve this and draw on the innovation and creativity of the team?
I've been around long enough where I remember where the notion of a chief information officer was new and fresh. And there's some similarities to what I remember from those conversations to what I'm hearing now. Is there a parallel there? And should we think about the data scientist as sort of a chief something at the same level as a technology officer or an information officer?
Yeah, certainly there are a number of organizations who have roles such as mine where we've combined economics and analytics together. Amazon perhaps is the one who's done it on the largest scale, given the nature of their business with supply chains and pricing and recommendation engines that we've all become familiar with. But other firms in the technology industry have as well. But what we have found is that there are still three separate needs, if you will. There is an infrastructure need that CIO teams are focused on. There are very significant data governance and data management needs that typically chief data officers are focused on. And there are very substantial analytics capabilities that typically chief analytics officers are focused on. Mm-hmm. It's certainly possible in many organizations to combine those roles, but in an organization the size of IBM and other large entities, it's very difficult just because of the complexity and the requirements across those three different functional areas to have that all embodied in a single individual.
And so as the Open Group's certification process has evolved, in that little spectrum they just laid out, analytics, data, information, and systems, where does this version of certified data scientist fit in?
It's really on the analytics side. A lot of what chief data officers are doing is data engineering, creating data platforms. We use the term Watson data platform because it's built on a certain technology that's in the public cloud. But that's an entirely separate challenge from being able to create the analytics tools and to be able to deliver the business insights and the business value that Maureen and George have referred to.
And what sort of, we're putting this in the context of enterprises and business. I should think this is also going to be pertinent and of interest to government agencies, to nonprofits, to quasi-public private organizations, alliances, and so forth. So given that this is a sort of societal level undertaking of making data science as impactful as it could and should be, what is it that we're talking about when we think about the data scientist career path? Is this now something that also has to be adjusted? Are we putting together a certification and a definition that we don't have any means of delivering the individuals from our current, environment or educational track? So is there a parallel career training to the certification, or are they sort of part and parcel with each other?
So there are a number of universities that have, over the past 3 or 4 years, launched Masters in Data Science programs. We're now seeing for the first time graduates of those programs who we are recruiting and hiring. I think this year will be the first year we bring in folks who've completed Masters in Data Science programs. And as we all know, universities change very slowly, and so it's just the early days. But certainly as the demand continues to grow, and we've barely scratched the surface in terms of the kinds of positions and roles across different industries. But that growth and demand is going to cause many university programs to continue to grow and continue to expand and feed that career track. It takes 15 years to create a professional, so we're in the early days of this.
And I would just like to add to that, too. With the certification, we're doing some outreach to universities because several of them that have masters in data analytics and other types of programs, they do significant capstone type projects, with real clients and real data and solving real problems. And if that is the case, then what we're trying to do is then provide a path for them into the certification so that the students could start earning like their first project profile or experience profile while they're in school.
And George, what about on the organic side of this internal inside of companies where people would find a path or a track from certain not professions necessarily, but job descriptions? Where do they come from, and how does that organic development of a data scientist professional happen inside of companies?
In IBM and in our group in global services in particular, we've developed a training program with a set of badges that get rewarded for achievement in various levels of education. But you still need to actually have a project that you've done with those techniques that you've learned through the education to get a certification. So you still, having the education is not enough. You actually have to apply it to get certified.
In order to understand why the importance of this new profession and certification is coming about now, when we opened up our discussion, I was teasing the idea of entirely new types of business value. Where is the potential here? And it seems to me that this is a great career path, that there's tremendous demand in the market. But it also strikes me as something that would be a very fulfilling and rewarding and rich type of career path. So what are the business values and what are the sort of impacts that these types of individuals can have? And let's start with you, Martin.
The way that businesses have traditionally been managed is largely through a profit and loss statement, an income statement for the most part. There are, of course, other data sources, but they're largely have been independent of each other. Sales, opportunity information in a CRM system, supply chain information in an ERP system, and financial information portrayed in an income statement, which gets the most rigorous attention, shall we say. We're now in a position where we've created a much richer view of the activity that businesses are engaged in and undertaking by integrating across those data sets, including the human resources data as well. And in addition, the nature of machine learning and artificial intelligence is predictive, so that we're in a position to be able to not only bring the data together, provide a richer view of what's transpiring at any point in time, but have a better view of where businesses are moving to. It may be the sought-after destination, or there may be a gap, but understanding where the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months is headed is a significant value creation opportunity.
So, Marina, are we thinking about a data scientist as someone who can help usher in the era when companies can ask their own systems based on the legacy data, the trail, the history that, maybe what new business initiative should we be taking? And rather than just finding that through intuition or gut or the highest paid person's opinion, that we, in fact, use the system to tell us where our next product should come from.
Well, I think that's certainly the direction that we're heading, is that we'll be able to have systems that really augment that kind of decision making. And so the data scientists I really view as pioneers, right? They're able to go into big data and dark data and a lot of different places and push the boundaries and be able to come out with insights that can then really inform in ways that really before were not possible. So you mentioned it must be a very rewarding career path. And I would 100% agree that there are so much value and so much promise that a data scientist can bring and solve problems that really hadn't been able to be addressed before. Mm-hmm. So it's a very exciting career path. And, we're excited to be launching the certification with it so that we can really help those data scientists have a clear path and make sure they can demonstrate those skills.
Mm-hmm. George, is this one of your better ways to change the world in the next 30 years?
I think so. I think if I can get more people to do data science and understand the value of data science, I'd be really happy. It's been fun for 30 years for me. I've had a great time.
Well, we've sort of danced a little bit around machine learning and Watson and artificial intelligence, but on the technology side, just briefly, what is it that's going to be also not just the people in the process side of this, but the technology side? It seems to me that we've been talking about things like quantum computing and distributed ledger, and there's some very interesting new capabilities on the horizon. Is that another reason why this could be just a super place to be in the next decade, Martin?
Absolutely. In the most immediate future, the benefits are largely because we have both a public cloud and a private cloud in a hybrid structure. And that brings the data, the compute, and the APIs together in one place, and allows for the kind of tools and capabilities that are necessary to be able to really improve the performance and the productivity of organizations. Blockchain is making enormous progress very quickly. It's essentially a data management data storage, but then that opens up the opportunity for further machine learning and artificial intelligence applications built on top of it. But that's moving very quickly. Quantum computing is further down the road. It will change the nature of computing, and it's going to take some time to get there, but it nonetheless is very important and is going to be part of what we're looking at over the horizon.
Maureen, what do you see on the technology side as most interesting in terms of where things could lead in the next few years when it comes to the whole nature of data science?
Well, I think with the continued evolution of AI, we are certainly pushing boundaries. And one of the really interesting areas, I think, is the emphasis right now on transparency and ethics within there to make sure that the systems are not introducing or perpetuating a bias. And so there's some really exciting, I think, work going on in that area that will be fun to watch going forward.
Sure. That raises the topic, George, of the data scientist as their own governance functionary, that they need to be considering not just what can be done, but what should be done. Is that brought into the certification process now, or maybe something that will come later?
Certainly it's brought into the certification now when we ask about how were things validated and how did the models get implemented in the environment that you talked about. That's one of the things the data scientist has to answer as part of the certification. We also believe that in the future we are going to need some sort of code of ethics, some sort of methods for bias detection and analysis, measurements of those things that don't exist today that we'll have to.
All right, before we sign off, I'd like to put a little bit more concrete on this, kind of an abstract discussion, but examples can be a great way to do that. Do you have any examples of an individual, maybe named or unnamed, or even a little bit of a hypothetical, of a data scientist in a situation that's doing work, that's creating something that perhaps is new, novel, and exciting for the future? So any examples, anecdotes, case studies of why this is important and what it can do, Martin?
We have a team led by intelligent and aggressive young woman who has put together a very significant product recommendation tool for our sellers. Folks who are familiar with IBM will know that IBM has a large number of products and a large number of offerings. So in any given client situation, the seller wants to be able to recommend to the client the offering that's most useful to the client's situation. And the ability now that we have with our recommendation engines to be able to make those recommendations to the sellers is something that really hasn't existed in the past and is now creating enormous value, not only for the clients, but for IBM as well.
Maureen, any examples jump to mind of that illustrate the potential for the data scientists?
Certainly we wrote a book to explain examples across 9 different business units. So there's certainly been some great examples in terms of finance and sales and marketing and supply chain. I have to give it a little bit of thought. You wanted a real specific example. So
maybe someone that would have benefited from the certification process a couple of years ago, and now that you can see with 2020 hindsight the path that they had, but now there's a certification process. Anyone or any use case scenario come to mind where the certification may have been something quite useful in your past?
I think it's going to be very useful, and it would have been useful to an individual because it really helps map out how to become the best practitioner that you can. And so, we have the 3 different levels of certification and going up to the thought leader one. And really it's designed to help that professional and help them grow within it.
George, anecdotes, examples.
So, yeah, I have a young man works for me down in Brazil, and he built a model for one of our manufacturing clients that identified problematic infrastructure components and recommended actions to take on those components. And when the client actually implemented the model, what they saw was a 60% reduction in SEV1 incidents and a 40,000 hour a month increase in availability for their supply chain. And we didn't have a certification for him then, but we will have now.
So a really big improvement. It shows to me that being a data scientist means you're not just in the back room making things happen that people don't become aware of, that this could really be something that is impactful and puts you in the limelight.
And it was pretty spectacular because the CIO for that company stood up in front of his whole company and in front of a group of analysts and called him out as the data scientist that solved this problem for their company. And so, yeah, he was a rock star for a couple days.
All right. For those folks who might be more intrigued with a career path towards certification as a data scientist, where might they go for more information? What next steps are to happen when it comes to the process through the open group with IBM and the industry at large?
The Open Group has officially launched this, so they can go to the Open Group website and check under certifications, and they will be able to read the information there about how to go about applying and getting this. Some companies are accredited, and each other industries can get accredited for running a version of the certification themselves. So IBM has recently just gone through the certification process. So we have built internally a process and everything that matches pretty much with the Open Group. So people can apply either directly to the Open Group, or if they happen to be within IBM or one of the other companies who will certify, they can apply that way and get the equivalent from the Open Group.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored Briefings Direct discussion on how the role of the data scientist in the enterprise is expanding, both in importance and influence. And we've learned how data scientists, especially those with this new certification, are being called on to work more closely than ever with enterprise strategists to predict emerging trends, optimize outcomes, and create entirely new kinds of business value. So please join me in thanking our guests. We've been here with Martin Fleming, Vice President, Chief Analytics Officer, and Chief Economist at IBM. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure, Dana.
We've also been here with Maureen Norton, Global Data Scientist Profession Lead, Distinguished Market Intelligence Professional, and author of Analytics Across the Enterprise. Thank you so much, Maureen.
And thank you, Dana. It's a lot of fun.
And lastly, we've been here also with George Stark, Distinguished Engineer for IT Operations Analytics at IBM. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dana.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us for this Briefings Direct Modern Digital Business Innovation discussion. I am Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of Briefings Direct discussions sponsored by the Open Group. Thanks again for listening, and do come back next time.